Well, I'm sure that a lot of you either have had teenagers or still have teenagers, so
Or may still be one.
or may still be a teenager. Thank you, Joni. But this father said to his very difficult teenage son, "Son, I want you to know that you are adopted." And the son said, "What? I knew it. I demand to meet my biological parents." And the father said, "We are your biological parents. Pack up. The new ones are coming to pick you up in 20 minutes. I've all been there. Today is National Garlic Day, and this is a stinking rose and a member of the lily family. And this family also includes onions, leeks, and shallots, and over 300 varieties of garlic. It's used obviously for cooking, but it's also used for medicinal purposes such as treatment of colds, hypertension, high cholesterol, and in some cases as an antibiotic. You know about the myths about warding off vampires, witches, werewolves, and demons. And one thing of interest is that Gilroy, California is known as the garlic capital of the world. And Will Rogers once was quoted as saying, "Gilroy is the only place in America where you can marinate a steak by just hanging it out on the clothesline." So Hearst is absent today, so we will start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated, and Joni will come up and do our Rotary Minute.
Happy birthday. Today is Paul Harris's 150th birthday. He was born April 18, 1868. And, you know, he founded Rotary at a very young age and completed in 1912 his formal responsibilities as president of the Rotary International. But he continued to make a difference even after that. So I thought I'd share with you just a few of his famous quotes. Not that they would apply to any of us. "A well-ordered mind is a possession more valuable than unlimited riches. It is just as easy to acquire the habit of speaking kindly as it is to acquire the habit of speaking unkindly. Perhaps dreaming is not so bad if one dreams good dreams and makes them come true. And lastly, the Rotary of today is different from the Rotary of yesterday, and the Rotary of tomorrow cannot and must not. It must continue to evolve." Paul Harris's spirit continues to live on in all of us, I believe. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Joni. Words of wisdom for sure. Carol Wheeler will do our guest introductions today. And we have stairs now.
Thank you. We're always thrilled when we have guests join us, and today particularly that you all found us. It's probably amazing. So when your name is called, the person who has brought you to Rotary will introduce you. If you would just remain standing, and then we'll welcome everyone after we've introduced all the guests. So the first is a guest of Jane McCall. Okay, so Kenny Myrick.
Hi, Kenny.
I haven't done this for a while, so Grace is getting me. Okay. Okay, so Kenny is with the Community Insurance Solutions. Thank you.
And we have his application.
Respected member, okay. Okay, and then from the Topeka South Club, Farron Barr.
Hi, Farron.
Carrie Norbury, for Washburn Tech, Associate Director. And your application's in too, I think. Great, nice to meet you. Colleen Jameson, with James Kaplinger.
Hi, Colleen. And we have her application.
Great. And the last one is my guest, and I'm going to do a little fuller introduction, I hope you don't mind. Steve Watkins, Jr. Some of you may recognize the name. His father has been a long-time physician here in the community, and we're delighted to have Steve with us today. Steve, I'm just so proud of. He has served our country through the military and the Army. He's been to Afghanistan and Iraq, and has decided to come back and tackle the tough problems we have in this country by trying for Lynn Jenkins' seat. So he will be running for Congress. Thank you, Steve.
Welcome, Steve.
You may be seated. Thank you. This month's featured charity is NetReach, and as you know, this is a Topeka Rescue Mission collaborative effort to address deep-rooted problems in one of Topeka's most challenged neighborhoods. This week, we will raise our Rotary International toast to a club who really is very close to us. This week, we are recognizing the Leavenworth Rotary Club, and just so you'll know, Leavenworth was the first club that our club sponsored into charter to become a charter club, and we were only 2 years old at that time. They were chartered April 1, 1916, and their current president is Tamara Jo Sevchik. So please raise your glasses in a Rotary International toast.
We had a happy birthday.
Hang on just a second. We have a happy birthday banner. Drum roll. There we go. So raise your glasses to the Leavenworth Rotary Club. Hear, hear.
Here. Where's Ann at? Right here. Oh, you got it? Okay.
Okay, we have some proposed new members today. And Carrie Norbury, you're going to hear from her in just a little bit. She is from the Washburn University Institute of Technology. She is the Associate Director of Admissions and is sponsored by Eric Grospich. We also have Alonzo Jameson and Colleen Jameson. You saw her there just a moment ago. And they have applied for the family membership, so we have that up and running. Colleen is an attorney for James M. Kaplinger Chartered. So and she's sponsored by Jane McCall, so we're very pleased to have you wanting to become part of our club. I have a couple of save the dates for you. Thursday, May 31st is going to be our club social, and we're going to do that at Glacier's Edge Winery. You'll hear more about that in the near future. And I really want you to think about this also. On June 14th, we have kind of a big event in the evening at Topeka Country Club. We will start with a celebration, a special celebration at 5:30 for Blanche Parks, who is going to become the district governor. And then followed by that, our club will have its own annual banquet celebration to just review the things we've done the wonderful things that you all have done this year, and to really have an enjoyable evening together. You'll get some save the dates about that and hear more. We have several announcements today about volunteer opportunities. And Carrie Norbury, if you'd come forward and talk about Career Days, which is coming up very soon. And while she's making her way up, I think last week I announced that we have several applicants for Wright Rotary Youth Leadership Academy in June. And our club has a budget for 3, and we have 5 applicants. So we're still looking for a couple folks to help sponsor those at $300 a piece. So if you have an interest, please talk to Linda or to me about that. So, Carrie?
Thank you all for letting me steal a few minutes at the beginning of this. So next week begins the annual Rotary Days, and this is my first time getting to organize it. I just joined Washburn Tech the end of July, first part of August. And we will have all the 501 7th graders coming to the campus. Next week it will be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the following week, May 2nd and May 3rd. And there will be opportunities to volunteer on the very first day, the 24th. We have a session in the morning and then another session in the afternoon. Then they're all morning sessions until the last day, which is an afternoon session. And I know they've got it posted on the website. It's been changed a little bit this year from what I understand. The students are coming and they've already selected themes that they're interested in. So if they're interested in the construction technology or in allied health, so they're going to, as opposed to doing a full walkabout of the campus, after Rotary presents information about Rotary at the very beginning, those students will then go to the areas of interest and get to do hands-on activities in those specific areas, and then come back for kind of a wrap-up session before they get back on their buses. So we'd love to have volunteers to help get the kids from the rally point in the center to their themes, and then back again, and just to help the instructors that have hands-on activities. Keeping middle schoolers this time of year can be kind of a little all over the place. So helping keeping them focused and gathered together will be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Carrie. So we need a lot of volunteers, so please watch your emails and check the website and give a little time if you possibly can. Lee Morris is going to talk to us about the next mentoring project that's coming up with Highland Park. In theater, we call what Carrie was talking about kid wranglers, so we need to help with that.
Thank you, Grace. We are having our follow-up mentoring event from our first event back at the end of February. It'll be May the 2nd. The same time frame, so it'll start about 10:45 in the morning and run until about 2 in the afternoon. We'll work with 3 classes out at Highland Park. We do still need a few more volunteers, probably at least 5 or 6 more, particularly for the afternoon session, which is a bigger class of students. I need to ask kind of a personal favor to get you excited and behind this, because it turns out that's the same day I'm going to have to go in to have my hip replaced. So I'm going to hopefully be there in the morning, but I'm going to have to leave. We'll be organized and ready, but I do need some additional help. Would invite the sign-ups online, or if you have any trouble, we've had several people have some trouble with that, please just email me or call me directly and we'll get you signed up. Thank you.
Thank you. We're sure being thinking about you on that day. And we have a special guest today, Farron Barr from Topeka South. Is going to talk to us in a little bit more detail about our upcoming trip, our service trip to Guatemala. And while he's making his way, I'll tell you that my husband and I have officially signed up, and we're very excited about going to this. So Farron's going to talk to you a little bit more.
Thank you, Grace. Yes, this will be my 7th trip to Guatemala doing this project, and it's a very well organized project. And for the first time, downtown and Topeka South are partnering on this, and we have 3 people from our club, which of course Mike's one of them. 3 people from our club that's going. Your club has contributed $1,000 to buy 20 water filters while we're there. Our club will contribute close to that same amount to buy shoes and paint the clinic that we have there, which needs to be painted periodically to pass inspections. We will also be gathering donations between now and then, and we can take those down and check bags. And we've done this many, many times, where we can take 9 bags, as long as they weigh less than 50 pounds, they're practically free to take down. And we distribute them to the different schools so that we make sure the kids that are supposed to get them do actually get them. It is, like I said, a well-organized trip. There are costs involved, which you will see on your sheet. I did check plane flights just before I came over here, and they're averaging between $620 and $700 to go down for a round trip. And the cost that you see on the sheet in front of you, that will cover 7 days of transportation, lodging, and food. So it's a very cost-effective trip, and you will never forget it.
Sharon, thank you very much. And I do hope that some of you can consider going on this trip. And what I hear over and over is that when you go on service trips like this, it is transformative for those who go. So I am personally really looking forward to this. Today, our speaker will be introduced by Terry Wages.
Thank you, President Grace. Good afternoon, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker and presenter today, Mr. Doug Wright. In 1983, when Doug Wright was elected mayor of Topeka, the Dow Jones average closed at 1,258. Now, it's a little over 24,000 right now, so you can imagine if you would have followed Doug and invested in the stock market where you would be today. You might be sitting here. And Wanamaker Road was still a two-lane blacktop road with ditches on either side. Doug's stand as mayor, he claims, had no effect on the Dow, but quite a bit to do with the commercial development on Wanamaker Road. Doug is a Topeka native. He graduated from Washburn University with a degree in history, and he enjoys reading and writing about local history. Doug recently completed 6 years as trustee of the Shawnee County Historical Society and currently serves as a co-chairman of the Shawnee County Baseball Hall of Fame. Doug tries to stay young and involved by traveling with Washburn students on their summer educational trips. 10 years ago, on a summer trip to Greece, he met his current partner, Ann Bennett. Doug was a student. Ann just went on the trip to look at the relics. She says she brought one home with her. Doug and Ann will be traveling to England, Belgium, and the Netherlands this summer on another Washburn trip. About today's program, Doug wrote 100 years ago, the United States was fighting a conflict that was referred to then as the war to end all wars. We refer to it now as World War I. Hundreds of young men and a few women from Topeka enlisted in the conflict, including 5 members of the Topeka Rotary Club. One Rotarian died, the aviator Philip Billard, after whom Topeka's municipal airport is named. Local historian Doug Wright, who pumped gas and took flying lessons at Philip Billard Airport years ago, is with us today to tell us more about Philip Billard and the role the Rotary Club played in the U.S. war effort. So without any further ado, I give to you former mayor and local historian Doug Wright.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I have a PowerPoint to go with this to supplement it. I don't know how the PowerPoint works, and I don't know where the clicker is, but I'm told that someone does know the answer to those questions and will be able to assist me with that. A couple of months ago, I ran into Mayor Joan Wagner, and I said, you know, this is the 100th year from of the date that Philip Billard died. He died July 24th of 1918 while test flying a plane in France. And he also was a Rotarian. And I told Joan, I said, I think maybe the Rotary Club ought to do something about this. And she said, well, why don't you give us a program? And so, and her husband Bill said, why don't you write an article for the next issue of the historical newsletter. So I've done that, and now I'm presenting this program for you today. This is the story of Philip Billard. Topeka's Birdman is what he called himself and what he was referred to in the newspapers. He was born in 1891 in North Topeka, but to really understand Philip Billard, you must first know something about his family. Next slide. J.B. Billard was Philip's father, and J.B. arrived in the Topeka area when he was 8 years old in August of 1854. His mother and father brought him here. His grandfather, Gilbert Billard, was was a French citizen living in Saint Leon, France, and was a Republican in the sense that he supported the French Republic. And in 1851, the duly elected president of France decided to stage a coup. He abolished the Republic, appointed himself as the monarch, and arrested a number of the Republicans, including Mr. Billard, Gilbert Billard. He was sent to the island of Cayenne off of French Guiana, where he was imprisoned. He eventually escaped, got to New York City, where he contacted his family and said, "Sell everything in St. Leon, meet me in New York City." In 1854, they're reading in the newspaper in New York City that the Kansas Territory is about to be opened for settlement. So they decided that they're going to move to Kansas, where there would be land available. They got to Kansas City, and they met another family of French expatriates. That would be Charles Sardou. And they decided to join with Charles Sardou and proceed a little bit further west. They arrived in the area that we now know as Oakland in Topeka in August of 1854. This was before there was a city of Topeka, and as I'm sure all of you Topekans know, Topeka wasn't founded until December 5th of 1854. That's our birthday. That's when the 9 men came to Topeka and signed the compact that actually established Topeka. So Gilbert Billard and his wife and his 2 children, including J.B. Billard, arrived with no money in their pocket in the Topeka area. And from that, J.B. Billard grew to become a very prosperous individual. He graduated from Washburn University. He founded the Ice Company, the Central Mill and Elevator, was a director of the Shawnee State Bank, and he actually served as mayor of Topeka from 1910 to 1914. 1910 is when the city commission form of government was adopted, so he was the first mayor in that particular form of government. He also ran for governor of the state of Kansas as a Democrat in 1912. He and his wife, Hermance Laurent, who also was of French ancestry, had 3 sons, Remer, Robert, and Philip. Remer grew up, went to El Paso, became very prosperous in the real estate business. Robert kind of took over most of JB's businesses here in Topeka. And Philip, I think, was just placed in God's hands to see what developed. He was born in 1891 and lived to be 27 years old. JB became very wealthy, and he had the wherewithal to indulge his son's passions for speed, for going fast, for dangerous and daring antics, first in automobiles and later in aeroplanes. Next slide. The Billard boys in 1910 had 16 cars. This was at a time when most Topekans didn't own a car. They had a Metz, 2 Fords, 2 Overlands, 8 Speedwells, and 3 Stutzes. And this is just a short list of Phil's driving record. He exceeded the speed limit of 16 miles an hour on Kansas Avenue. I'm going to tell you about a couple of these. In 1909, this is how a 19-year-old brain works. This is a prime example of this. Phil, who was 19 years old, after a night of partying with a couple of chorus girls who were members of the touring Marcel troupe, along with his buddy George Rudder of Lawrence, decided to take a joyride in Billard's car. Well, his car was kept in a central garage. So when they arrived, either late at night or early in the morning at the garage, they found out that Billard's car had a flat tire. Well, what would a reasonable person do? They probably would say, well, let's do this some other time, or they'd fix a flat tire. The 19-year-old brain decides, let's just take the car next to us. We'll have it out, we'll have a little joyride, we'll get it back, no one will ever know. I guess it escaped his notice that this car was owned by Lee Monroe. That would be Judge Lee Monroe. and it was a brand new Thomas Detroit touring car that they took out for their little joyride. They got out by Barryton on a gravel road. They turned the corner real sharp, ran into a fence, and ended up in a ditch. as you can imagine, Judge Lee Monroe found a way to get JB to pay for the damage. One other example is down there where in 1910, his driver's license to drive in Topeka was suspended. He was driving on what's now West 10th Street out by Gage Park, and he was driving furiously on the wrong side of the road. And at that time, your privileges to drive in the city of Topeka were granted or suspended by a 3-member board that was appointed by the mayor. And so Mayor Billard appointed these 3 men to this board, and both Mayor Billard and his son Phil appeared before this board, and he asked for leniency. Well, the board said, no, we're going to have to suspend your license. You're suspended for 30 days. So again, the 19-year-old brain kicks in. What would you do if your license to drive in the city is suspended for 30 days? He announces he's going to drive to New York City and back. He's got the privileges to do that. And bear in mind, this was at a time there really wasn't a road between Topeka and New York City. They got to New York City, he and a couple of buddies piled in the car. They got to New York City, got back. About 30 days later, they announced that they had gotten a ticket in Dayton, Ohio, and also in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And when they were going through Illinois, unfortunately, the car went into a creek, and they had to have a farmer come pull it out. But in any event, that's kind of what Phil Billard's driving record was like over a few short years. And we'll go to the next slide now. You can imagine, this was a limerick that appeared in the Topeka paper about him. A young man in Topeka named Phil, who was a four-flusher, no doubt of great skill, how his mobile swerves as he dashes around the curves, and the old man foots up the bill. That's J.B. Billard on the left, that's Phil over here on the right. I'm sure that J.B. and Hermance sat around the dinner table. They spoke French at home, and so they're speaking in French. And J.B. must have said to his son Phil, "Boy, just what exactly were you thinking?" And Hermance must have said something like, "Jules, we just have to get the boy off the street." And I think the light bulb went on in Phil's head, and he says, "I've got the answer." His buddy A.K. Longman, he happened to be the guy that owned that central garage. He was building airplanes. So in July of 1912, Phil decides to take a flight in Longman's airplane. Took a flying lesson. 2 days later, he bought the plane. And he began barnstorming around the Topeka area and then around Kansas as Topeka's birdman. He set a bunch of flying records. He flew to Russell, Kansas, following the Union Pacific tracks, and set a record for getting there. He flew 86 miles an hour. All of his flying exploits were printed up in the paper because it was such a novelty. And there really weren't any other planes. Whenever anybody heard the plane overhead, they'd come out of their house and they'd watch him flying around. So let's now go to the next slide. This is something I'm sure all of you know, because before you join, you probably have to know the Topeka Rotary Club was founded in July of 1914. And this is a page that comes from the Topeka Capitol from 1915. And it shows the founders of the Rotary Club, the first officers, and the next year's officers. In fact, this entire section is interesting to take a look at because all the advertising in there was done by Rotarians. And it tells a little bit of the history of the Topeka Rotary Club. George Godfrey Moore, that's the gentleman in the center, was the founder of the Topeka Rotary Club. And he enlisted his friends Robert Stone, John Brown, and Scott Hopkins with the idea, what do you think about setting up a Rotary Club? They thought it was a great idea. They began the club with 25 charter members, and after a year they had a membership of 94. By 1916, both Robert and Phil Billard were Rotarians. I think it's fair to say that the Rotary Club was probably Topeka's first service club. There were certainly a lot of clubs in Topeka. There were dinner clubs, there were literary clubs, and dance clubs and other things. But Rotary was specifically set up to be involved in service. And they helped do things like raise money for the Washburn College endowment. And because of his leadership in that, George Godfrey Moore had the football stadium at Washburn named after him, Moore Bowl. Also, 75 to 100 Rotarians helped the farmers in the Minokan Township recover from a tornado. And Rotary did a smart thing at the time. They got both of the publishers of the two major newspapers in Topeka, the Capitol and the Journal, as members. So Arthur Capper and Frank McClellan from the Capital, and the Journal were members of Rotary, so any of the club's philanthropic efforts were spread wide and far within the, across the community. Furthermore, Arthur Capper was also governor of the state of Kansas from 1915 to 1919 at this particular time. The people in this wheel, on the left side are the first-year officers with George Godfrey Moore in the middle. He was the president. And then at about the 10 o'clock position is E.W. Rankin. He was the vice president. J.M. Brunt, going counterclockwise, was the secretary. Ray Latner was the treasurer. And Charles Matthews was the sergeant at arms. Up at the 12 o'clock position is Robert Stone, who was the president-elect. Charles Dillon, the vice president. W.F. Axtell, secretary. Herbert West, treasurer. And E.L. Overton, sergeant at arms. Let's go to the next slide. War was raging in Europe at this time. The U.S. didn't enter the war until April of 1917, but Phil Billard had French blood in his veins, and he felt a desire to assist his family's homeland. In February of 1916, he persuaded Governor Capper to organize an Aero Corps within the Kansas National Guard, and Governor Capper referred him to the adjutant general, who followed up on this idea. And so they did establish an Aero Corps, but they didn't have an airplane. So Billard decides, I'll go to my friend Longren and I'll tell him to build an airplane. I'll give him $10,000. And so out of his own pocket, he spends the money to build this airplane. $10,000 in that day and age, I'm told, would be worth about $185,000 today. And so they had an airplane, and he started enlisting people to join the Air Corps and filled it up with young men around Topeka. In March of 1917, the U.S. Army wanted to test Phil's flying skills. And they had 3 tests that they required of him. He had to do a cross country of at least 25 miles. So he flew from Topeka to Lawrence and back and set a record for the flight to and back, which passed that test. He had to do a dead stick landing from 2,500 feet and land within 500 feet of a certain location, which he did. And then he had to fly a tight figure 8. He did all of that. And of course, everyone in Topeka knew that he was going to be taking this test that day and that he was going to be observed by the Army. So at the end of it, he did 13 loop-the-loops over the Capitol building as a way of kind of celebrating. And everybody was wowed by that. The Capitol said that a lot of Topekans had their hearts in their throat at the time watching him do these things. But he really got into the acrobatics up in the air. By the end of March, though, of 1917, Congress voted not to fund Billard's Air Corps, so it was disbanded. And because the U.S. wasn't yet in the war, he offered himself and his airplane for service to the French government. But before he could hear back from the French government, the U.S. entered the war, and Phil decided to enlist in the U.S. Army. And he left for California to train pilots. He was there, and he said he was anxious as soon as possible to render active personal aid to bleeding France, his homeland. Unfortunately, he got stuck in California training pilots who got commissioned and sent to Europe, and he was more valuable as a trainer, so he contacted his dad and expressed his frustration to JB, who then contacted Senator Charles Curtis, who intervened and was able to get Phil moving and got him sent to Mineola, Long Island, where he finally got his commission, and eventually he got sent to Europe. All the time, all of where Phil was going was being reported in the local papers, and his status as a hero in Topeka grew. The papers wrote that his skill as an airman is the equal of any of Uncle Sam's most skilled aviators. And the Journal observed that among the little boys of our town, the hero worship goes pretty unanimously to Phil Billard, the airman. And the Capitol then wrote, if you wish to speculate on the identity of the first American into Berlin, place your money on Phil. Next slide. During the war, the Rotary Club was called upon to provide some help. The war was financed through the issuance of Liberty bonds, war bonds that were called Liberty bonds, and they paid 3.5% interest. And in May of 1917, they had a bond rally at the Rotary Club. And members were asked to buy Liberty bonds. 40 Rotarians bought $17,600 worth of bonds, which in today's money would be $325,000 worth of bonds. Kansans bought $20 million worth. Topeka purchased $3 million of those. And usually these rallies had letters from Phil Billard or some of the others who were in the war effort that encouraged people to buy the bonds. The Rotary Club was also raised $2,500 to build a recreation building at Manhattan for soldiers stationed at Fort Riley. They sent thousands of books to soldiers in Army camps in Kansas and Oklahoma. And in May of 1918, they raised an additional $1,500 in bonds. And the newspaper reported every Rotarian tried to beat every other one in getting his name down for another helping of bonds. They also had a letter from Lieutenant Billard at that time giving an update on the war and asking that he receive correspondence. The 5 Rotarians in the service, in addition to Lieutenant Billard, were Lieutenant George McDermott, Captain T.J. Strickler, Captain Joseph C. Wilson, and Lieutenant Carl C. Younggreen. Well, Phil Billard never got into combat. He never experienced a dogfight with the Red Baron or any of the other foreign pilots. He was eventually assigned to test airplanes that had been repaired at the huge aerodrome at Issoudun, France. I don't speak French, I might be misspelling that. But his work was very dangerous and it was very important. He wrote home to his brother Billard, "It's very interesting, but at times I get up in a kite that sure do fly queer. And it's a case then of wonder and hope if I'll get the darn thing back whole. I always have up to now, but I've had several itchingly close calls." Next slide. On July 31, 1918, the headline in the Topeka State Journal simply read, "Phil is dead." And everyone knew to whom it referred. Actually, Phil had died on July 24th, about a week earlier, 1918, at the controls of a de Havilland 4. Now that's a de Havilland 4 down there. It's got a pilot seat in front and a second seat in the back. No cause was ever pinpointed as to what caused his accident. But it was speculated that his passenger, who was a mechanic, who was seated behind him, passed out during one of the loop-the-loops that Phil liked to do and slumped forward on the dual controls, making it impossible for Phil to recover from a dive. He went nose first into the ground. Topeka was shocked by this because he carried a lot of hopes for a lot of people. But it was the Rotary Club that conducted the public memorial service for Phil Billard and sought to preserve his memory in several different ways. It wasn't surprising that his memorial service wasn't held at a church because J.B. wasn't particularly religious, and in fact, when he'd had his arguments with religion. When Phil was a student at Quincy Elementary School, the principal at Quincy Elementary School used to read portions of the Bible and books from Ernest Thompson Seton to the students as they filed in from recess in order to calm them down. J.B. didn't think that the principal of a public school should be reading the Bible in a public school. He thought you get your religious education at church, and at the public school you get your reading, writing, and arithmetic. So he filed a lawsuit, went all the way to the Kansas Supreme Court. And the Kansas Supreme Court held in favor of the school and the principal, and they said that it was appropriate to do that for that particular purpose at that time. And that remained as good law in the state of Kansas until the U.S. Supreme Court decision in the 1960s that ruled that reading the Bible in schools is not appropriate. A footnote to that story, the principal of Quincy Elementary School was a fellow by the name of W.H. Wright, William Henry Wright. He was my great-grandfather. So on August 5th, Monday, August 5th, the Rotary Club held a special memorial. And that particular week, the Rotary Club met on a Monday instead of a Thursday. I don't know what it takes to meet on a Monday instead of a Thursday, but it must be something very important. And this was viewed to be that. Robert and J.B. were in attendance. Fred Derby, who was the president of the club, introduced the speakers. Charles Mitchell read a biography of Phil. B.P. Bartlett sang the Marseillaise, the French national anthem. And Fred Voiland gave a talk on service. In his talk, he noted that, and this was largely unknown, Phil sent home practically all of his salary as a lieutenant in the Army to his brother with instructions to use the money to buy Liberty bonds. So that exemplified what Rotarians viewed as service. Governor Arthur Capper was president. He recalled that Phil Billard was the first Kansan after war was declared to express to him a desire to get into active service. And the Rotary Club adopted a resolution of condolences, and that's the resolution right there, and presented it to J.B. and Robert Billard. But the Rotary Club wasn't done honoring Phil Billard at that time. They had proposed, a couple years later, they proposed that the city name the municipal landing field after Phil Billard. The problem was the city didn't own the landing field. They were, at the time, leasing a field called Cowles Field that was said to be west of Washburn University. I'm not sure exactly where, but it was west of University. And it was ultimately decided that it wouldn't be appropriate to put the Billard name on a leased property. So once the city was going to acquire and own an airport, they thought maybe that would be appropriate. Let's go to the next slide. The Rotary Club then engaged local sculptor Robert Merrill Gage to produce a sculpture in Billard's honor. Now, Robert Merrill Gage was born in Topeka, studied art at Washburn. He was an assistant to Gutzon Borglum. And those of you who've been to Mount Rushmore would recognize that name. He's the person that did Mount Rushmore. And this is the Lincoln statue on the State House grounds, and that was Robert Merrill Gage's first public commission done in 1915. So the Rotary Club approached Robert Merrill Gage with a committee of Henry Bennett, Frank Beck, Fred Derby, Fred Voiland, and Robert Stone, and asked him to make a statue. They wanted this statue to appear in the Memorial Building, which was the old museum down at 10th and Jackson Street. And so Robert Merrill said, I have an idea. I've got a statue in my mind I want to create for you. It represents, it's called Flight. It represents a nude figure of a man rising from the earth with a long flowing robe hanging from his arms and streaming out behind. Let's go to the next slide. And this is the statue that the Rotary Club commissioned Robert Merrill Gage to make. And he thought of the figure of the nude man coming in. It's not intended to be Philip Billard, by the way. It's just a man who is coming out of the earth as and with this robe that was referenced in the Arabian Nights. And so this was the statue that was made, and after it was created and presented to the Rotary Club, it was on display both at the Memorial Building downtown, and it's also been on display at various times at Philip Billard Municipal Airport, where I first saw it when I was working there while I was in college. It's currently at the Kansas Historical Museum. It's in storage. It's very heavy, stands about 4 feet tall. But I mentioned to Joan Wagner that if she's going to have her Rotary event this summer, maybe she wants to get this statue out and have it on display and honor Phil Billard on the 100th anniversary of his death. And the folks wheeled this thing out so I could take a photo of it at the museum. It's very heavy. I'm not a particular art fan or anything. They said if you're going to display it, you really need to put it behind a piece of glass because it gets touched, and it gets touched probably where you really don't want it to get touched, and it kind of ruins the bronze and everything like that. So if you do want to display it, I think they would be glad to help you, but they'd also have some suggestions on how it should be displayed. Let's go to the next slide. Phil Billard was also honored, and maybe this is because of his transatlantic or his driving New York and back. This is something that was dedicated on the Victory Highway, or the transatlantic highway that was built after World War I, and he is one of the Shawnee County residents whose death is honored with this memorial, which is now located at Gage Park, just near the corner of 10th and Gage. And the last slide. So in summary, this story is the story of a man who raced through life, who transitioned from a wild teenager to a war hero. He was known, or at least his flying skill was known, to every man, woman, and child in Topeka. Flying was at the time a risky novelty, and when the sound of his motor was heard in the skies,
Thousands came outdoors to watch him circle the State House dome, dip low down Kansas Avenue, or soar into the clouds before landing. He was referred to as the Birdman of Topeka and also as the Pride of Topeka when he went off to war. And when it was written that no man ever had a more adventurous spirit or steadier nerve, they were talking about Philip Billard. His life was the stuff of heroes, and his death clearly touched a nerve with his friends in Topeka, and especially his friends in the Rotary Club. They noted that he was of French blood and was anxious to get into the fight as he rode home against the Huns. He gave his life for France as well as his own country, and the Rotary Club of Topeka took steps to ensure that he would be remembered to future generations. In 1940, when the city of Topeka did finally build an airport, they named it Philip Billard Municipal Airport. I'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Doug, thank you so much. That was an absolutely excellent presentation today. And it's our tradition to present in your honor a book to the Ross Elementary School instead of giving you a coffee cup you don't need. Today, our book is Still a Gorilla, so we'll ask that you sign the book plate on that before you go. And hopefully, you'll have time afterwards to talk to people if they have questions. So thank you so much. Next week, we will be meeting at the Ramada Grand Ballroom, and hopefully we won't have any surprises like we did today. And our program will be given by one of our newest members, Dr. Gianfranco Pizzini, and he's going to talk to us about the state of health in Shawnee County. Where you live matters, and I have heard him talk on this subject, and it is fascinating. So please make an effort to come. So let's close with the four-way test plus one. Of the things we think, say, or do,
is the truth, is it fair to all concerned, will it be good goodwill and better friendships, will it be beneficial to all concerned,
and will it be fun? Whoops.